White people still don't get why uncontacted tribes want nothing to do with them. And it's embarrassing. White people love to act like they are the bringers of civilization, yet their entire history is proof that they are completely incapable of understanding why isolated tribes want nothing to do with them. They approach uncontacted peoples like they're characters in a National Geographic special, not actual societies. They assume everyone wants progress, even when progress means disease, land theft, and cultural destruction. They act shocked when tribes react with hostility, despite centuries of white arrivals resulting in death and disaster. They still try to make contact, convinced that these people need their help, despite all of history suggesting otherwise. At some point, we have to ask, if white people were truly the most rational and intelligent civilization, why can't they understand that some groups just want them to stay the hell away? Every time white people discovered a society, it ended in death. The first European explorers didn't discover new lands. They showed up, spread disease, and took everything. Wherever white populations went, indigenous people were wiped out by measles, smallpox, and influenza. They enslaved, displaced, and eradicated entire civilizations, and then wrote history books calling it exploration. Today's isolated tribes aren't ignorant of history. They know exactly what happens when outsiders arrive. The Taino welcomed Columbus, and within 50 years, their population was nearly extinct. The Aztecs and Incas initially tolerated the Spanish, only to be betrayed and slaughtered. Native Americans that allied with Europeans were still wiped out by land grabs and genocide. Even in modern history, tribes that made contact were often relocated, Christianized, and stripped of their way of life. Why do contacted tribes attack white intruders? Because history says white people showing up means death. White people keep trying to help people who don't want or need it. They see uncontacted tribes as primitive rather than fully functional societies. They assume these groups are suffering, despite them living just fine for thousands of years. They push Christianity, technology, and Western education as if these tribes were just sitting around waiting for a savior. They ignore the fact that many contacted tribes were forcibly relocated, stripped of land, and thrown into poverty. Meanwhile, uncontacted tribes are doing just fine without white progress. They have sustainable lifestyles that have kept them alive for generations. They know how to survive in their environment better than any outsider. They don't want or need money, modern politics, or globalization. They are rejecting outsiders because they've seen what happens when white people civilize others. White people aren't bringing progress. They're bringing destruction, and tribes know it. White people get unalived for approaching tribes and still don't learn. Missionary John Allen Chau illegally tried to make contact with the Sentinelese in 2018 and was promptly brought to justice with arrows. The Sentinelese, one of the last truly uncontacted tribes, have violently resisted outsiders for centuries. White explorers have been attacked, driven out, and even eaten by tribes that wanted nothing to do with them. And yet, despite all this, white people still try to reach out, convinced they can be the one to make peaceful contact. Meanwhile, the Sentinelese and other tribes are just protecting themselves. They have seen what happens when outsiders arrive. It never ends well for the tribe. They know that even small interactions could introduce deadly diseases. They don't need white saviors. They need white people to leave them alone. White people aren't being met with hostility because these tribes are barbaric. They're being rejected because history proves they're dangerous. White people still think everyone wants to be like them. They assume that because they see progress as good, everyone else must too. They refuse to believe that people can be happy without Western technology, capitalism, or religion. They push Western ideas of civilization while ignoring that these tribes have survived for centuries without them. They can't comprehend that some people don't want their way of life and will fight to protect their own. Meanwhile, uncontacted tribes have their own systems that work for them. They have social structures, practices, and traditions that are suited to their environment. They don't need or want modern industry, schooling, or white religions. They reject outsiders not out of ignorance, but because they are actively defending their own survival. White people aren't being seen as liberators. They're being seen as a threat because they always have been. White people still think they're discovering things that have always existed. They act like uncontacted tribes are lost, despite the fact that they know exactly where they are. They try to map and study cultures that have been living successfully for generations. They frame remote societies as exotic mysteries, instead of just leaving them alone. They treat tribes like relics to be documented, instead of people with a right to live undisturbed. Meanwhile, these tribes know exactly what they're doing. They deliberately avoid outsiders because they understand the danger. They have traditions, skills, and knowledge that outsiders don't respect. They aren't waiting to be found. They are actively resisting contact. White people weren't discovering the world. They were crashing into it and destroying everything in their path. White people still don't get why uncontacted tribes want nothing to do with them. And it shows. Every time white people made contact with indigenous groups, it ended in disease, destruction, and genocide. They keep trying to help groups that don't need their interference. They ignore warnings, get attacked, then act surprised. They assume everyone wants to be like them, when they clearly don't. They still frame uncontacted tribes as waiting to be discovered, instead of just respecting their autonomy. White people didn't bring civilization. They brought catastrophe. They weren't helping these tribes. They were threatening them. If white people were truly the most intelligent civilization, why have they spent history ignoring every sign that says stay away? Cope.